This is VISTA Member Skill Development, a webinar for VISTA supervisors and leaders. In this webinar, we'll be discussing how to create opportunities around building skills for your members so they can be successful in completing their service assignments. I'm your host, Andy King, Senior Training Specialist with AmeriCorps VISTA Headquarters. And I'm joined today by Kate Baldus, who is an educator and a learning experience designer with over 15 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. For many years, Kate designed national trainings for the VISTA program during her time at the Bank Street College of Education. She most recently designed staff and mentor training programs with iMentor, a national mentoring nonprofit. Kate now works as a consultant. Welcome, Kate. I'm so happy to be co-presenting with you today.
Thank you, Andy. I'm excited to be here with you and talk about one of my favorite topics, training and workplace skill development. Supporting and training the VISTA members not only deepens the impact members can make in communities, it's also a form of professional development for the members, which is one of the benefits of service. The skill development they could get from all of you set them on a path for their future careers. Let's start by exploring how we'll spend our time together today. We're going to begin by discussing ways to identify learning needs. Next, we'll identify and describe methods of skill development. Lastly, we'll discuss how to develop a learning plan. Members come to us with a range of skills and experiences. Some are right out of college, others have experience in the field, and others are career changers. Just as members build capacity in the organizations and communities they serve, you, as sponsors and leaders, may need to build the capacity of your members. That's where member skill development and training comes in. Today, we'll be focusing on training after your members' on-site orientation and training, since many of you are past that point already.
So we'd like you to share some of your experiences around member skill development, and again, using the chat. If you don't see the chat panel, move your cursor. You'll see a little speech bubble icon in the tray at the bottom. Select that icon and that will open up the chat. And please be sure to send your response to everyone so that others on the webinar can see what you contribute. So our question here is, in what ways have your members benefited from the learning opportunities at your project? So we'll give you about half a minute here, play some music, and we'll look for your responses to come in. All right, so we've got a few of your responses coming in, and some of you have mentioned about being able to build their skills specifically around presentations and public speaking, getting some practice around that. Others talked about being able to learn more about the community, engage with the community, so having a better sense there. Some of you talked about the fact that your members have specific professional development time set aside so that they can, in a very methodical way, go about meeting their personal and professional development goals. Some of your members have been able to earn certificates for the professional development work that they're doing. You see things like team building, interaction, stronger relationships. So lots of ways you're identifying some of the benefits that have come to your members. So thank you for all of those responses. Keep them coming if you haven't had a chance to drop yours in yet. But Kate, I want to turn to you and see what it is that you're noticing in the responses.
Yeah, I mean, I love seeing how people are talking about some of the actual skills that you can build in your members, but it's also really nice to see how people are talking about the relationship building part and not only engaging with your communities, but building a sense of community. Because I do think that a lot of learning, is social, right? Social and emotional, and we learn when we build connections with one another. And it's also really nice to see how, for some of you, maybe members will get a certificate or go on in higher education, kind of seconding the idea that this is really an opportunity for professional development and really an opportunity to impact the career trajectory of the people that you're working with as VISTA members. So thank you so much for participating in this activity. We're going to expand on your ideas and discuss why skill development matters to VISTA. It's helpful to think about skill development as having layers of impact. We can categorize the benefits of skill development into three main layers based on who's benefiting: the member, the project, and all of AmeriCorps. For the member, as you all mentioned in the chat, skill development makes it easier to perform certain tasks and provides a sense of ownership over their service. As they become more successful and better perform the tasks that are part of their service, they will gain stronger buy-in and better results overall. For the projects, members who are better equipped to serve in their roles are naturally more likely to succeed in achieving project objectives. And finally, when projects succeed and members feel good about their experience, all of AmeriCorps benefits. The agency is able to promote the work of alleviating poverty more effectively using success stories and positive anecdotes from members. Now I'm going to ask Andy to share the perspective from VISTA headquarters.
Thanks, Kate. So here at VISTA, we hear it from several different perspectives, whether from sponsors, leaders, or members, that it's essential for members to have the opportunity to build their skills. And here's just one example of a member's perspective. This is a quote that came from a member who talked about their need for training during a focus group that we had run. This member was in their third month when they said, "Having no prior experience in any of the duties on my VAD is both exciting and intimidating. It is new and interesting to learn about, but it is difficult to problem solve when you don't have someone to guide you."
Thanks for sharing this reflection from a member, Andy. It's a great illustration of why skill development is so important for members, many of whom are taking on certain tasks for the first time. I'm curious to know if you've seen this with your own members. So let's use the chat to find out.
All right, so if you were logged in before the webinar began, you may have already seen this question, and a few of you had a chance to respond before we got started. But in the interest of full participation, we'll pose a question again so that everyone has a chance to reflect on their individual members' learning needs. So based on what you know about your members, what is one area in which your members could gain or could use some skill development? So again, we'll give you some time and a little music to get your thoughts in the chat. So what's one area where your members could use some skill development? All right. Well, there's a whole range of topics coming in here. Everything from, more individual skills like organization, time management, goal setting, to more workplace type skills like communicating effectively, professional communication, or communicating with confidence. Some of them are specific to maybe the nature of their VISTA assignment. So whether that's fundraising or outreach communication, those types of things. So yeah, nice. It looks like there's some parallels here that several of you are mentioning some of the same types of skills where, at least from your vantage, Your members could use some skill development here. So, Kate, did anything stand out for you?
Yeah, similar things I think to what you talked about, Andy, kind of a range of experiences, communication, technology. I think it's interesting how one person mentioned how they have two VISTA members and they have different training needs. And that can definitely be the case. Sometimes there might be overlap between what your members need, but sometimes training might have to be pretty individualized, depending on the background of your VISTA member. So thanks to all of you for sharing. It's really interesting to learn more about the areas in which your VISTA members need support. Your responses and the focus group quote Andy shared demonstrate exactly why it's important to have conversations about skill development. But before we do, let's describe a bit more in detail about what we mean by skill development. Member skill development is a process of equipping VISTA members with the skills and knowledge they need to successfully perform the duties of their VISTA assignment description. Projects must train VISTA members to perform required duties that are not prerequisites to service. That is, the skills and knowledge that you don't require in the initial application and screening phase of member selection. Depending on your project and your member's background, there are different types of skills that you might want to work on developing. And you've all kind of shared these already in the chat. One area is technical skills related to specific kinds of software, databases, products, and services your agencies use. A lot of you talked about communication and leadership skills. And this is an area where VISTA members, especially those who are new to the workforce, really might need support. Training targeting these skills may include subjects like professional writing, meeting facilitation, grant research. I saw a few of you mentioning the grants. Members may also be required to take security trainings related to equipment or protocols with their agency. And finally, team trainings covering topics like group dynamics, diversity and inclusion, or difficult conversations. But you don't need to develop all members in all of the skill areas we just went over. Let's discuss how to assess and plan for member skill development so that you can give members the support they need at the time they need it.
So before we begin, before we continue, we want to hear from you again. This time we've got a quick poll that you'll see pop up on your screen. Needs assessments can help you decide where to focus your members' training and skill development. And with this question, we'd like to know, how often are you conducting a needs assessment with your members? Do you do them once during the member service term, for them quarterly, monthly, or have you not yet used a needs assessment? So if you would, in that poll, please select one response and then go ahead and click the submit button so your answer will get tabulated. I want to emphasize there's no wrong answer here. We're really just trying to take a pulse and see, trying to learn a little bit about your current practices here and see where folks fall out on this spectrum. And so, we know that your actual practice might fall somewhere in the middle here. So in the poll, please just select the response that's closest to your experience. So it looks like a majority of you have responded, but there's still a number of you who haven't yet. So I'll give you a few more seconds to get your answer in. And just a reminder, if you selected one, but you didn't click submit, you'll want to do that now just so that you will get tabulated. Almost, yeah, looks like we've got 3/4 of you in. If just like final call here on how often you conduct a needs assessment. Okay, looks like the responses are slowing down. So we'll go ahead and we'll end the poll and we will then share the results with you. So you can see, looks like the biggest category, 38% of you said you're conducting some kind of needs assessment with your members about every month. And then after that, there's about 30% of you haven't yet started with needs assessment. Some of you are doing it a little less often, quarterly, and others are doing it really just one time in the member service term. So a real range here. Want to thank you for participating and sharing your thoughts. And if you haven't yet done a needs assessment, if you're part of that 30%, we hope that after today's session, you'll feel a little more prepared to do so. Back over to Kate.
Great. Yeah, thanks all for sharing. And kind of as Andy noted, it was great to see the range of how you're approaching this. And it looks like I think 38% of you are doing, monthly check-ins. And I also see in the chat people talking about, maybe not always doing formal check-ins, but informal check-ins during your one-on-ones with your members, which is all part of the process as well. So we're now going to use a scenario to talk about how to create a learning needs assessment. We have a new VISTA member, Madison, who's serving as a volunteer coordinator with a nonprofit organization that provides healthcare services to low-income individuals. The goal of the VISTA project is to establish a sustainable volunteer program and build the organization's volunteer base. The activities on Madison's VAD include developing new volunteer recruitment methods, designing a volunteer onboarding program, and creating a volunteer management handbook. I'm going to pass it back to Andy to do another poll.
All right, so now that you have some background information on Madison, we'd like you to think about this question. How would you assess Madison's learning needs so that she can accomplish the goals on her VAD? Would you talk to her about her skills? Would you observe her while she's working? Would you read her VISTA assignment description, her VAD? Would you use the VAD to create some kind of needs assessment tool? Or will you know what her needs are after she's completed her on-site orientation and training? So again, there's a pop-up poll on your screen. Here you can select multiple options if you think more than one assessment technique is appropriate. So again, choose one or more of these, how you would go about assessing Madison's learning needs. All right, it looks like about 60% of you have submitted a response. Again, after you make your selection, you have to click submit, otherwise it doesn't get tabulated. All right, well, looks like the responses are slowing down, so we'll give you just a couple more seconds, then we'll go ahead and end the poll. All right, so I want to thank everyone who submitted a response here. And one of the things, if you're, weren't quite sure how to answer this question, one possibility would be to consider the kind of help that you might appreciate getting if you were in the member's seat, like how a supervisor or a leader might have been able to assist you. So it looks like a lot of you selected talking directly to the member, to Madison, using the VAD to create a needs assessment of some kind. So those were the top two responses there. And then afterwards, observing, just reading the VAD, and then using OSOT, the on-site orientation and training, as a way to gauge what the needs would be. So, the fact that all of these got some responses kind of indicate that there are many ways that you can understand what your members need to learn. And for some, this could even start during the interview process, right? As you're talking to them about the role and what the needed skills are going to be, and hearing them describe their own capabilities. But then, of course, further into the member service, Sponsors can start using check-in meetings, as some of you already indicated, as well as observations to learn more about what the members' needs might be. And as a number of you indicated, I think by your selection, the VAD, the VISTA assignment description, it was designed to be used in several ways. And one of those is to help you plan for the service year, but also to use it as a check-in tool, right? To conduct some ongoing needs assessments with your members as they progress through their service. Thank you for participating and sharing your thoughts here. Kate, anything that you noticed in these results?
Yeah, similar, I think, to what you surfaced here, Andy. And I'm seeing in the chat too, people kind of talking about, using all 5 of these things. Really trying to get a big picture of what's going on with your members. And I think, what we really want to, there are very different ways to go about assessing learning needs, but we just want to make sure that it's important not to assume that you'll know immediately everything the member needs, and that's absolutely fine. That all of these are techniques that you can use to find out what they want to know more about. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can use the VAD and adapt the VAD into a simple self-assessment. So as Andy mentioned, the VAD was, created to serve multiple functions, and making a learning needs assessment can be really easy by using the VAD. You can use the member activities section to identify the key skills your VISTA member will need to perform their duties. You can also search the goals and objective statements for other topics your VISTA member will need to learn, like the characteristics of your community and your organization's mission and theory of change. You can then use an online form or a paper survey to make a learning needs assessment that asks about the member's skills and experiences. Ideally, this will act as a self-assessment for members, giving them a chance to reflect on their current skill levels so they can then share that information with you. Potential questions include, rate your knowledge or skills in the following tasks, and how comfortable do you feel doing these tasks? The learning needs assessment allows the member to share their learning needs from their point of view. Sponsors and leaders can also use the assessment to identify what they see the member doing or not doing regularly. After the member fills out the self-assessment, meet with them to discuss their strengths and identify areas where they need skill development. This process does take time, but it provides a solid foundation for ongoing member support. You can also reuse the assessment throughout the service year to track the member's growth and stay informed about their support needs. Let's go back to our VISTA member, Madison, and meet her supervisor, Susan. After giving Susan a learning assessment, Susan discovers that Madison has strong writing skills, so she feels confident having her work on the handbook. However, Madison is new to volunteer recruitment and onboarding, and so is their organization in general. They aim to recruit 30 volunteers by May, which seems challenging given Madison's lack of experience. Susan feels unsure about how to support Madison, especially while they're building a volunteer program from scratch. I'm curious, what would you do in a situation like this?
All right, so we're going to invite you again to participate in the conversation using the chat for this activity. So considering the scenario we just heard concerning Madison's supervisor, Susan, we'd like you to think of Susan's uncertain reaction to Madison's needs assessment and wondering if you could share what advice you would give to Susan about how she could approach things with Madison. We'll give you some music and a little bit of time to get your thoughts in the chat. great. So we've got lots of great responses coming in. Please keep yours coming if you haven't had a chance to submit it yet. Some of the ideas that have been offered here, one is to connect the member, Madison, to a local organization that already has a strong volunteer program. So that way Madison can learn about how they do what they do. Others of you talked about, training. Does Madison need more training around volunteer management, whether that's online or in person, or is it something that you could offer in-house? Others talked about doing some more exploration with the member, right? So asking appropriate questions and actively listening. Um, you know, Others talked about self-directed learning opportunities, or so maybe it's some readings or some online research that the member Madison could do. And then the supervisor could, maybe have a quiz to test to see the knowledge that the member has gained. Yeah, so some of you have said similar things in different ways, but I'll leave my summary there. And Kate, just want to see what you noticed and if there's anything else that you want to highlight here.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, it's interesting really to see how, a lot of people are just surfacing the universal topics, kind of the general skill area that Madison needs to build. And yet at the same time, also people talking about really talking, directly with the member, asking questions, really trying to figure out what she needs. So I do think there's always that balance between the universal things and then really the personalization. Was really interesting to see a couple people talking about connecting her to a mentor. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but I do think it's important to think about skill development broadly. That often we just think we need to send somebody to a training, but we can develop skills in different ways. And really lovely to see people talking about the VISTA campus. The VISTA campus is there for you to find resources just for yourselves and for your VISTA members. And then unrelated to this question, I saw a couple people asking about tools to do self-assessments. I think you can use any kind of, we use online form just to make it kind of general. You can use any kind of tool that you really would want, like Google Docs, SurveyMonkey, really up to you. Come up with your questions and you can just build it your own pretty quickly. So really appreciate all of your responses. One of the things that we want to think about is having Susan think about, what it is that Madison needs to know now and what skill development will be ongoing. And I think you all kind of surface that in terms of like the universal topics or talking to her, asking her questions. This is not a problem to be solved immediately. And there's no reason why Madison should have all the skills needed for all of the tasks at the beginning of the service year. So thanks for all of these great pieces of advice. Let's go ahead and start exploring another approach Susan can take with Madison's skill development. If you find yourself in a situation like Susan's, here are 3 questions you can use to prioritize your members' learning needs. What do your members need to know now? What skills can they develop later? And what skills do they need the most support in? Consider these questions in conjunction with your overall plans for the year and map out a monthly plan for when you need your VISTA members to do certain things. I'm going to give you a real-world example of how this process can work. When I oversaw a training program for staff at a nonprofit, we identified staff learning needs in multiple ways. We had all new staff members complete a needs assessment at the beginning of the year and discuss their strengths and areas to develop with their supervisors. We then had some trainings for all new staff members, along with others that were targeted towards developing particular skills, like tech training for those who didn't know Excel, or more classroom training for those who had less experience teaching in the classroom. Finally, we observed staff, both in trainings and on the job, to learn more about how they perform their key tasks. Some people might say they have skills that are actually not as developed as they think they are, and others might be too humble about what they know. You will probably notice members doing the same things. It's important to think of assessing and prioritizing skill development as a layered process that will evolve throughout the service year. Training and skill development is most effective when it comes right before someone has to do something. Some of the most effective trainings I've ever done were on how to use Zoom back in March and April of 2020. I had led many introduction to Zoom training sessions before, but because Zoom was not an essential part of everyone's work life before COVID, there was mixed engagement. But as soon as we were living in an all remote world where everyone was both attending and leading Zoom meetings and trainings, interest in the Zoom training increased, as did people's learning about how to use every element of the system. Another point about training is timing. If the training takes place too early, adult learners often don't understand the need for the training, or they forget what exactly they need to do by the time they need to do it. For example, when I worked in a mentoring organization, we did a lot of training in August as a kickoff for the school year. For one skill area, mentor matching, which took place in November, we found ourselves having to redo training that we had already given in August. The mentor matching training came too soon for it to be relevant to our learners. So we moved that training to later in the school year. This led to better retention and allowed us to better pace the trainings. When it comes to member skill development, you need to have access to specific learning resources. There are 3 ways you can get these resources: buying them, borrowing them, or building them. Let's revisit our scenario. Since volunteer recruitment training is a new area for Susan's organization, she needs to think about whether she wants to buy, borrow, or build materials that will help with Madison's skill development. Buy means, is there existing content for purchase that will suit her members' training needs? Borrowing means, can she partner with a local organization for training? Can she adapt any of her organization's existing trainings to use with Madison? Or does she want to build or develop custom training or support?
So we've got another activity for you to weigh in on. And as we start to discuss buying or borrowing resources to support training, we want to hear about your experiences. So we'll use the chat for this activity and invite you to share where you have found external training support. This might include places like partner organizations or websites that provide online courses, or local educational institutions, just to name a few examples. So interested to hear what you actually use that you think works, what's helpful for your members, where do you go? So we give you about 30 seconds and a little bit of music to get your ideas in. All right, so we're seeing some great examples and ideas coming in here. Everything from using LinkedIn Learning and other online workshops, including the Vista campus. Happy to see that show up several times. Some of you have talked about uh, resources that the organization has accumulated through its past networking, and maybe partnership um, examples that have happened there. Um, working with community partners and looking at mentoring opportunities, whether it's through school or from previous work opportunities, and yeah, formal training, using the library. I love that has popped up a few times here. Good old fashioned brick and mortar libraries, tremendous wealth of resources there. Um, so yeah, thank you for sharing these ideas. Keep them coming if you haven't had a chance to get yours in yet. And Kate, I'm curious what caught your attention here.
Yeah, it's also really interesting to see the range of ideas. I noticed the LinkedIn Learning, the books, the library. And what I see in this range of ideas too is sort of surfacing for me the idea that There are different learning modalities, and I think part of like supporting your members is figuring out maybe which modalities might some learners learn best in. Someone mentioned YouTube Academy. Videos are a really great way for people to learn, but I think there are other, we talked about books and library. Maybe other people, maybe you have a member who really would prefer to read something. I also see somebody mentioned peer-to-peer learning. I know sometimes for some people, they'll attend a training. I sometimes find with technology kind of things, people will attend a training, and it still doesn't click for them, but they need someone to like walk them through it, hands-on peer-to-peer learning. And so I think, this range of ideas that you're all having is speaking to the diversity of learning styles and backgrounds. And also different types of skills maybe need to be built in different ways. Some things I think you can read a book to learn about. Other things, it's better to see a video. And somebody else just put in the chat, members can share their skills also. I think that's also something really to think about, that members can learn from each other. I really believe that we're all teachers and learners, and think it's really empowering to think about, what are the strengths that everybody brings to an organization, a project, or a community.
Yeah, and Kate, I'm going to add here, given the great wealth of ideas generated, um, I really appreciate everything that's been shared. So after the webinar, I'm going to compile a list of all the responses, and then I'll share that with the recording. So afterwards, if you want to go back and look at what your colleagues have said, you'll be able to access it.
Oh, great. Thanks, Andy. So when should you buy or borrow training as opposed to building it? Because this definitely came up in the chat. There are many topics out there that are universal or applicable to all organizations. When you need to train a member on one of these topics, using external training resources is often a good choice. If you have a VISTA member, for example, involved in fundraising, grant writing, which some of you spoke about earlier, is a topic that lends itself well to external training. Returning to our scenario with Susan and Madison, Madison could benefit from an external training around creating a volunteer position description. This is a training that Susan could pay for Madison to attend, either locally or online, as a lot of you shared in the chat. But she could also direct Madison to the courses on the VISTA campus, to borrow an existing resource created by AmeriCorps. Some of you, it seems, are aware of the campus, but for those of you who aren't, on the VISTA campus, there are recorded webinars on topics like making a volunteer recruitment website and digital marketing for volunteer recruitment. AmeriCorps also hosts live webinars for VISTA members, similar to webinars like these that are aimed at VISTA sponsors and leaders. You can find upcoming webinars in the calendar on the campus. And coming up later this month is one on professional workplace communication and relationship building, which is something I think I heard some of you talking about that your members could benefit from. And this is something that, in particular, any members who are new to the workplace could benefit from attending. So even if you do find external training resources to buy or borrow, every organization has unique ways of doing things and a need for skills that can only be developed internally. For example, Susan will need to train Madison on the most important volunteer onboarding topics for their organization. When thinking about custom training, consider these questions. What skills and topics can you train your members on? What skills and topics has your organization already created content on? And who else in your organization can support with skill development? One of the benefits to building your own custom training is that you're building sustainable resources that you can use in the future or with different audiences. For example, if Susan builds a training about the organization and their mission to lead Madison through, she could adapt the content for onboarding volunteers and new staff. When I worked for a nonprofit developing staff training, we spent the first few years drafting content, creating a library of resources to draw from and refine, which made onboarding new staff easier over time. But depending on the size of your organization, your existing resources, and how much time you have for developing trainings, creating custom materials could be a big undertaking. However, skill development does not necessarily have to mean training. We named this webinar Member Skill Development, as we know some of you may have a cohort of members to train, but others may just have one or two members. These two situations will call for different ways of developing skills. Synchronous in-person or online training, and asynchronous self-directed training, like readings, workshops, or formal e-learning courses, are all effective. But there are other ways to build skills. For example, coaching during weekly check-ins with members, mentoring, as some of you mentioned in the chat, from another person in your organization, and peer learning. When I worked in a mentoring organization, we had a program called Program Manager Buddies. We would match new staff members with returning ones so they could learn from each other. It was a nice way to model mentoring. It allowed for individual skill building, and it empowered staff in their second or third year to support someone newer. We're now going to talk about how you can develop a learning plan, which serves as a roadmap for your members' skill development. We have put the ideas we've discussed so far into a handout, where you can see how these steps culminate in developing a learning plan. The link to the handout is now in the chat. Making a learning plan does not have to be complicated. Basically, it can be a chart or list providing an overview of the year and the member's activities. You can start by filling in the month and the tasks the member will do. Then you and your member can work together to identify the skills they need to develop and what they will do to develop those skills. This can be a living document that you work on with your member during the year, adding skills and plans for skill development as you define them.
So we've been talking about learning plans in a general sense, and now we'd like to see how the ideas that Kate has been sharing currently relate to your projects. So in the chat, we invite you to respond to this question. Are you more likely to use external training or to build it custom? And if so, what resources do you need to do this? So it's sort of two questions there, but we'll give you about half a minute and some music to reflect on those questions. All right, so looks like a number of you have responded with some version of saying using both, right? Building some of your own and using external and having a combination so that you can make advantage or take advantage of what exists out there, and then perhaps filling in on certain topics that might be more specific to your project or your community or tailored to your members' needs. Yeah, so thank you for your thoughts there. If you have other ideas, feel free to share them. We've got a couple of specific examples that just came in. But Kate, I'm going to turn it back to you and see what is standing out for you.
Yeah, it's great to see the range, and it's really great to see that a lot of you are already building your custom training, that's kind of part of your practice. I think one thing that I do see in the chat is someone talked about affordability, right? Sometimes, even LinkedIn Learning is a great resource, but you have something you have to pay for. And so, that's definitely something to think about, especially if you're a smaller organization, and that's why I think thinking about other types of informal learning, as well as, more formal learning, and hearing people talking too about being fortunate to be linked to other organizations. The idea really of borrowing, right? A lot of us are doing work that's been done over many years. We don't always have to be reinventing things on our own. So thanks for sharing all of your thoughts. As you make your decisions about how you want to train your members, as I shared before, you're building a new infrastructure of sorts for your organization. just like your VISTA members are building capacity in your communities. You may be adapting or developing materials for your members' benefit at first, but in the long run, you may find them helpful for training staff members and volunteers as well. So let's talk now about how you can assess your members' learning at the end of the skill development process. One of the final stages of skill development is assessing what your members learn and how they need to continue developing. Assessment is an ongoing process and can be done in a few ways. Earlier, I mentioned observing members to assess learning needs. You can continue to observe VISTA members in action to assess how they're developing in their roles. If they're emailing partners to build relationships, ask to be copied on the email. Likewise, if they're meeting with potential partners, join the meeting. Afterwards, you can provide your member with feedback on their performance. You can also revisit the learning needs assessment on a regular basis. Ask members what they think of their development so far and where they might still need support. Then, based on that discussion, update the learning plan. Discussing these things with your members is crucial because everyone has a different learning style and preference. Some members will thrive when given more independence, and others will need more structure and support than you anticipated. Learning how your member learns best is a central part of the process.
All right, so now that we've explored the process of skill development fully, we're going to share another scenario with Madison and her supervisor, Susan. In a moment, we'll launch a poll with a question for you to answer. So here's the scenario. Susan is planning Madison's upcoming skill building activities, and Madison recently completed trainings about volunteer recruitment. The organization was able to recruit 15 new volunteers as a result. So based on what we know about prioritizing learning needs, which skill should Madison focus on now? So you'll see a poll appear on your screen. So which skill should Madison focus on now? Would it be volunteer recruitment, volunteer onboarding program, organizational onboarding, or communication? So I'll give you a few seconds and some music to get your answer in. All right, so it looks like a little more than half of you have gotten your response in. If you haven't had a chance, I invite you to do that now. We'd like to get as many responses as we could. So we'll give you just a couple more seconds and then let's see. All right, we'll go ahead and we'll close the poll now and we'll take a look at what we think is the best answer here. Um, from our vantage, the best answer would be B, volunteer onboarding program. So because her organization has recently recruited 15 volunteers, Madison should turn her focus to the volunteer onboarding program, which most of you figured out. So great work on that. Thank you.
Okay, so in closing, we want to revisit the importance of member training. Highly trained members are more likely to succeed in service and have a greater impact on the community than members who have little training. And also, I think, as some of you mentioned in the chat too, that the skills can be transferable. So as we close, we want to do one final activity. You'll now see 2 questions in the chat. What are you taking away from this conversation? And what is something you want to do after participating in this webinar? Take a minute to answer one or both and add an A or a B before your answer to signal which one that you're answering. After the answers come in, we'll have a few minutes to reflect on what you're planning for next steps. Okay, so great to see some of these ideas that are coming in, and really nice to hear someone saying that they feel like they're seeing more resources than they previously thought. That's really wonderful. People are talking about, developing a list of skills they want to prioritize, you know, doing the needs assessment, creating the learning plan. Someone talking about wanting to incorporate the needs assessment into onboarding for their host sites. Really great way of thinking about these tools, how they can be used in different places. And the importance of really actively listening with our members, right? I think, the worst thing is if we ask our members what they need and then they don't feel like we give it to them, right? That we really need to listen and develop in the ways that they want to be developed. And then thinking about just, ongoing communication. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for putting your ideas in the chat. If you hadn't had a chance yet, we'd love to hear from you about what you'd like to take from this webinar. We want the webinars to give you actionable things that you can do. And remember, you're not alone in the process of training and developing your members. As we discussed earlier, there are lots of places to get external training, and don't hesitate to reach out to others in your organization who might be able to support you. Before we go, I want to mention again the handout that we developed to help guide you through supporting your members' skill development. There's a link to it in the chat. The handout outlines the concepts we covered here, especially the 4 steps to member skill development. It also includes a template for a learning plan that you can adapt for your members to use. There are also many sources of free online training that offer topics relevant for many VISTA members. They include sites like Nonprofit Ready, Coursera, and Allison, as well as professional associations and other sites focused on particular professions like volunteer administration or resource development. You will see a link to a list of such resources in the chat. I appreciate all of your participation in the session today. Thank you so much. Now, Andy has a few announcements before we wrap up.
All right, thank you, Kate. So we'd love to hear what you think about this webinar. You're valuable as always. Your input is always really valuable to us. So we ask you to take a moment or two to complete a brief survey. It may already be open in the chat or the browser window behind the webinar. We do review all the feedback and we use it to figure out how we can improve our presentation. So we thank you in advance for any feedback that you would like to share. I do want to mention our next webinar for VISTA sponsors and leaders, scheduled for Thursday, November 21st, same time, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be on the topic of building strong relationships between members and supervisors. A link to register to that is in the chat as well. You'll also get an invitation in your inbox. And as Kate mentioned earlier, you can always see what's coming up by visiting the calendar that's on the VISTA campus. And speaking of the campus, here's another plug for a feature that's relatively new there. It's an interactive map where you can find other supervisors, members, leaders, and alumni. And once you find them, you can send a private message through the Vista Connect portion of the Vista campus. To protect your privacy, the pins only show approximate location, and it's based on zip code. And if you go to the map and you don't see your pin there, but you'd like it to show up, go to your user profile, make sure you've got a valid zip code, and then make sure that the searchable profile box is checked. And if you don't want to be on the map, just uncheck that box. When you go to the map, it'll automatically show you people who are within about 100 miles of your location. If you want to see people in other states, you can use some filters that are on the left side of the screen to change the state or the search radius. Just be aware if you pick a wider search radius, it'll take a little bit longer to load the pins. So it might take up to a minute for those to appear. But to see the map, just go to the Vista campus, log in, and then on the top menu, select Vista Map. It's that easy. So this is the time we usually have set aside for questions. We don't currently have any questions in the Q&A. So if you have one that you'd like to ask now for Kate, we've got a few more minutes left. Welcome you to drop that in. Earlier, I think I saw someone who'd asked about templates. So the handout that Kate mentioned does have a very simple template for ways that you can build a learning plan for your member. There also are steps in there, not necessarily a template, but some steps and information on how to use the VAD as a foundation for building a simple assessment with your members. And let's see, we just had a question come in from Destiny. Just curious where the templates and handouts will be sent to, personal email or work? Great question. So whatever email you use to register for this webinar is the one that we'll send it to. So wherever you got the link to join for today, that's where we'll be sending it. And if you don't see it in your inbox, you can always go to the Vista campus and go to the recording, which will be listed there. And if you want to find the recording, you can go back to the calendar and the registration link will be replaced by a link to the learning path where the recording is located. So thank you for that question. Jaren asks, for both Kate and Andy, what are your job titles exactly and what do you enjoy most about what you do? Well, that's probably a bigger question than we can get to in the minute we've got left. Rose asked, will there be a webinar on adult learning? So this is the one we've done, probably not on general adult learning principles. This one here is specific around member skill development. We do have a session that'll be coming up in December looking specifically at ways to use collaboration and mentoring as a way to help your members advance their skills. So that's coming up in December. All right, so we're at the top of our hour now. I want to thank you all for your questions and all the participation today. I want to thank our presenter, Kate Baldus, for such an informative and engaging session. Instructional design assistance was provided by Vanessa Francis, Elizabeth Floyd, and Cameron Greenup, and our session producer today was Stephanie Natoli. But most of all, I want to thank you for participating. This concludes our webinar. Thank you for joining.